Back in 2005, real estate developer Andrew Kissel was arrested, accused of stealing more than $30 million from his investors. 1 year later, just days before he was about to plead guilty, Kissel was found brutally murdered. 48 Hours Mystery correspondent Erin Moriarty follows the money.
Some of the cases that I've worked included the biggest fraud in history, the Bernard Madoff case.
Retired FBI agent Steve Garfinkel also investigated the case of 46-year-old Andrew Kissel.
If you would Google Andrew Kissel, you would find that he was the president of a real estate management group. By all appearances, he looked very successful.
He was the worst thing that ever happened to his investors and to people who trusted him with money.
His attorney, Phil Russell.
He stole money. That was something that he didn't seem able to control. He wanted a bigger car, he wanted a bigger boat, he wanted to be out in front.
In fact, Kissel scammed banks, investors, neighbors, and even his own family out of $40 million.
He just engaged in one fraud after another.
What kind of guy can do something like that?
A very troubled guy.
Andrew Kissel was arrested and charged with bank fraud.
He was upset he was caught. No remorse, no self-flagellation, none of that.
He agreed to a deal. Just days before pleading guilty, Andrew Kissel was alone at his Greenwich, Connecticut mansion.
My phone rang, and it was a prosecutor from the U.S. Attorney's Office. She said, "It's Kissel." And I said, "Suicide?" And she said, "No, homicide. He's been murdered."
Who murdered the brazen con man? Erin Moriarty, CBS News.
And you can see the entire 48 Hours Mystery Report tonight at 10 o'clock Eastern here on CBS. Joining us now from Newton, Massachusetts is Nancy Walkley, the attorney who blew the whistle on Andrew Kissel's scheme. Nancy, good morning to you.
Good morning.
When did you realize that something was wrong?
Well, I was involved in 2 real estate transactions with Mr. Kissel through his attorney, and the fact that there were 2 back-to-back transactions, each with some unusual circumstances, led us to be a little suspicious and caused us to scrutinize some of the documents that were being involved with these various properties he was developing, and ultimately led us to conclude that something was not right. There was a fraud going on.
Yeah, you suspected forgery. Is that true?
Well, it was forgery and fraudulent releases of mortgages, so that he was effectively on the land records freeing up his titles so that he could borrow more and more money against them, when in reality those were fake releases, and all of the banks involved still had live mortgages on the properties.
And you had been involved in transactions involving Andrew Kissel before. When you saw what you thought was a discrepancy here, what was the first thing that went through your mind?
Well, because the first transaction was unusual in that a mortgage showed up at the last minute that shouldn't have been there. When the second transaction came up, and initially there was no mortgage on the record, then there was a mortgage. We ultimately obtained copies of all of the releases in the 2 chains of title on these properties, and noticed that there were the same notary used for multiple banks, which is impossible.
Sure. Had you ever seen anything like this before in your experience?
Never. Not in this extent.
What was the first thing you did when you realized that something was wrong?
Well, I contacted his attorney and I said, there's a problem here. I had called one of the banks that supposedly had released the mortgage, and they said, oh, the mortgage is alive and well and the balance is $5 million and change. And I called his attorney and I said, we have a problem here. We cannot go ahead and fund this loan. It was going to be a new loan of $6 or $7 million. And he communicated then with Mr. Kissel, who ultimately said to him, well, just pay it off, and because there was going to be enough money from this closing. And I said, no, we're not going to pay it off. The closing is adjourned.
Yeah, and again, this was when a lot of free money was going around. This money was flowing like water, correct?
The banks just were handing it out.
When you found out that he was murdered, what did you think?
I was shocked. Again, I'm a real estate attorney. I don't get involved in that side of life, and it just seemed an interesting conclusion to what started out as a bank fraud.
You did not know Andrew Kissel personally, Reverend. You had done some dealings with him. Is there anything you can tell us about him?
Other than that, he was a known developer in the Greenwich, Connecticut area, and a developer that banks were looking to lend money to.
And again, this is something you never experienced before, so you're looking at that transaction there. And this is a lot of money, obviously, but again, there was a time when a lot of money was just being thrown around. Did you hesitate at all about blowing the whistle on this?
I didn't, because finding out that one loan was still alive when it appeared of record to be long ago released could have been the tip of the iceberg, as it turned out to be. There were multiple mortgages on these properties that appeared to be released, and they weren't. He was juggling them and paying them currently so he could keep getting more money.
Okay. Nancy Walkley, we thank you so much for joining us this morning. You take care.
My pleasure.